Ukraine seeks a new peace formula. Ukraine pursuing direct talks with Russia and its complexities. The Russian summer offensive in Ukraine is proceeding as expected. The Russians are not attempting a rapid advance, but they have chosen a strategy of exerting relentless pressure on the Ukrainians with an offensive to wear them down. Although the delayed arrival of Western aid is inflicting more casualties on the Russian armed forces, it is currently insufficient to completely halt the Russian offensive. As expected, NATO leaders continued to pledge support for Ukraine, but they did not offer membership or a timeline for joining. The upcoming U.S. presidential election in November is instilling anxiety in Europe, as it could shift the U.S. support from openly supporting the war to advocating for a negotiated settlement, a stance that aligns with the current European Union President, Viktor Orban. Ukraine still has strong support in Europe and the U.S., but war weariness both internationally and domestically, and the bleakness of the Ukraine ability to retake captured territory, are causing Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky to consider the once unthinkable and open peace talks with Vladimir Putin. Russia's military strategy is implementing its strengths and exploiting Ukraine's weaknesses to erode Ukraine's position to such an extent that it is now considering peace talks. The Russians are able to achieve this with their superior quantities of artillery and artillery ammunition, and to a lesser extent air power, which they use to leverage their superior firepower and their manpower advantage. The Russians are not attempting to seize significant areas of Ukrainian territory, likely due to their limited capabilities against Ukrainian defenses and their reluctance or need to seize more territory. The Russians have already captured approximately 25% of the pre-2014 Ukraine borders, and capturing more territory will push them into parts of Ukraine where there are fewer ethnic Russians, requiring larger occupation forces in what would be expected to be a hostile environment. Remembering Afghanistan, the Russians aim to avoid operating in a hostile territory unless it is necessary for their military objectives. The Russian goal is not to take large amounts of territory, but rather to consolidate their gains, fix the Ukrainian forces, and use their superiority to force the Ukraine to take casualties or retreat. A retreat inevitably results in Russia filling the gap and continuing to pressure Ukrainians in an ongoing cycle, which impacts Ukraine's support for the war. The goal is not to capture territory, but to destroy Ukraine's ability and will to continue the war. Recent public opinion polling by Ukraine think tank Razumkov Center indicates that the Ukrainian population is becoming pessimistic about the war, and which is in its third year. A plurality of respondents, 44%, outside of the frontline regions support Ukraine and Russian officials to conduct peace talks, and 21% of respondents were undecided on the question of peace talks. This is a significant shift in the views of the Ukrainian population, but the survey also shows the Ukrainian population is not ready to give up either. 83% of the population strongly opposes Ukraine retreating from unoccupied Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions, indicating that they are not ready to surrender to the Russians. However, this does suggest that the Russian-occupied parts of these regions are open to negotiations, as only 51% of the population believes that Ukraine must return to its 1991 borders. The poll also shows Ukrainians are strongly opposed to enforcing neutrality or non-nuclear status as part of any peace deal with the Russians. Their survey helps the Ukrainian leadership understand what the population is willing to accept in any peace negotiations. What is disturbing in the poll is that there is clear war weariness in Ukraine, and that the new conscription law that allows the drafting of younger men into the conflict does not have strong support. The average age of the Ukrainian soldiers is in their 40s due to the Ukraine's deliberate policy of excluding the youngest adults from the draft. This policy aims to protect Ukraine's future generation by not sending them into combat before they can start a family. Ukraine's low birth rate is a concern, and sending prime-aged adults into combat would only hurt the birth rate of the future. However, the Ukrainian army faces such severe manpower shortages that they had to modify the conscription law to include more younger individuals. The government is shocked because 40% of Ukrainians believe refusing military service is not shameful. This means that a significant softness in the support for the war. The population has significant opinions on what Ukraine should not give up, but also indicates they are not as willing to increase sacrifices to get there. Of course, the survey's frame may have been flawed, potentially distorting the context of the questions when compared to other survey questions, but the results provide valuable insights for Ukrainian leaders. The Russian reaction to the Ukraine trial balloon of peace talks in November as a follow-up to the June Swiss peace conference, but this time around the Ukrainians have stated that the peace talks should include the Russians. The Russian reaction to the Ukraine proposal has been less than magnanimous. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov did not commit to the idea of attending a Ukraine-sponsored peace summit because the June Swiss-sponsored peace conference was not truly a peace conference. This was neither a Kremlin rejection nor a commitment. Former Russian President and former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev was much less measured when he stated that ending Ukraine is a Russian goal, even if it takes 10 years. Medvedev also stated that a negotiated end to the war does not mean that Russia will give up on its aspirations to destroy the Ukrainian state and occupy the regions of the Donbass. Despite not being part of Putin's government, people perceive Mr. Medvedev as a representative of the hawkish elements within the Kremlin. The Russians can be this cavalier about the peace talks because Putin still has a high level of public support, which has translated into support for the war. Russia also has battlefield advantage in its spring and summer offensives and strategies, with the belief that it can outlast Western support. The polls in both Ukraine and West seem to support the Russian strategy. The Ukrainian government, seeing that there is no pressure on the Russians to end the war, must seek a way to incentivize Russia to participate in the peace talks. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has invited Ukraine Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba to visit Beijing for the first time between July 23rd and 26th. President Zelensky heavily criticized the Chinese for their refusal to attend the Swiss peace conference in June, accusing them of trying to sabotage those talks. China is Russia's primary supporter in the war with Ukraine and is facing more Western sanctions for its support. Since Russia is not under internal or external pressure to negotiate peace, only China can influence it. The Ukrainian government sees that this is a way to get Russia to the table, despite the fact that it would have to swallow its pride and negotiate with the Chinese, who put in a lot of effort to reduce participation in the Swiss peace conference by exploiting the glaring flaw of not allowing the Russians to attend. The internal support for the Ukraine President Zelensky has concluded that Ukraine must pursue peace talks due to the eroding support for the war, the difficulty in replacing battlefield losses, and the perceived loss of future Western aid. The unfortunate fact is that Ukraine is attempting to start peace talks with the Russians when the Russians have the battlefield advantage. This means that the Russians will be in a strong position in any peace talks, as they have no internal pressure to end the war and they have battlefield initiative. The Ukrainians would have been in the best position to seek peace talks after the successful spring offensive of 2022, which had the Russians on their heels. Unfortunately, Ukraine now needs to rely on the bold actions of China to persuade Russia to engage in meaningful peace negotiations. The other option is to continue on the current trajectory, which will eventually lead to Ukraine defeat on the battlefield or a widening war that would most likely involve parts of the West.